This conference will now be recorded.
All right, so we're live and on the air, or I don't know, never been on the radio, I always wanted to say that. All right, welcome everyone, thanks for joining. And here we are from quite different locations. I am in Vancouver, I'm one of the suburbs, but you can easily locate Vancouver, so you know where I am. And you're not, you're all up north. And here we are, though, spending some time together this afternoon, and or I guess technically still this morning for you. So I'm looking forward to sharing a couple of ideas and some thoughts. What's very interesting is when I was first approached about, presenting, I said sure, because I've done a number of these. I've done with Toronto, New York, and when we were during COVID, we did the leadership weekend virtually, which was interesting, right? We kind of had different approach. Obviously, we rather than be in the room together, we had breakout rooms and stuff. So we kind of chugged along, and then we started meeting again in person about a year and a half ago. I think the first in-person leadership weekend was down in Denver, and then we just kind of moving along. And I was just telling Craig before we start up here that the 1.0, which is down in Miami next month, sold out this week, and then the 2.0, which is in Montreal in May, is not sold out yet, but I know we will, just because it's just a great weekend, and plus a great location. So there's my background with Ashrae a little bit. So as Craig already said, but just to add a bit, I'm based in Vancouver. My company, just to give you a bit of context, first off, I am not an engineer. My background is in marketing, management, business development, a little bit of HR, sort of organizational development. So I come at this from a different perspective than most of you, or if not all of you, probably do. And I find that that's really useful because just give you a quick kind of how I started doing a lot of work with technical professionals, so engineers, geotech, architecture, construction, so forth. When I was president of a business association here in Vancouver, I was doing presentations and I was part of a speakers bureau. And then, people, associations, as you know, like today, you're always looking for speakers. And so I did a presentation to a group by the name of Canadian Society for Marketing Professional Services, CSMPS. And they're primarily people in professional services. So like you, like me, because we're consultants, law, architecture, and so forth. And there were two, I think they were partners, if not partners, certainly senior managers with an engineering firm here in the Lower Mainland. And they said, we like what you're saying. We'd like you to come talk to our people. I said, sure. So we worked out the details, and I went and did an afternoon presentation, and it happened to be on business development. And what was interesting, and I know it's different from today's topic, but I just want to kind of give you the background, because then when I'm presenting and as I invite you in to chat, you'll have a bit more context where I come from. And so we did BD, and what was interesting, I mean, most of these guys, they were what I would call training hostages, because they were busy and they thought, why is this guy coming in talking to us about BD? We got 6 months of backlog. And I, to myself, thought 6 months of backlog, that's all. And they're going, we got 6 months. And I'm going, that's all you have. So it was a different perspective. So my view has always been, particularly around business development, but also around leadership, about what we're going to talk about today, that we need to be taking the long, or playing the long game, or taking the long view. So what I have found I've been able to do, and what I'm going to try to share with you guys today, is some perspectives on what I'll broadly put under the heading of leadership, because, yeah, and it might be leading yourself, right? Because I think life balance is one of those topics that it's like put a fork in that one. It's just moving all over the place depending on the person. So I'll tell you right now, I will be interested to hear if you have anything to offer and perspective on it, because your perspective and opinion is as important and as valid as mine. But as we go through this, let's think about how, as we're not all consultants, but you provide a service. I don't know if any of you are product oriented, but you're probably selling something, selling ideas, or getting buy-in, if you prefer, on what you do. And then as you do that, you're also going, well, I enjoy what I do, maybe, or maybe not. Maybe if you had more balance, you'd enjoy it more. And that's where I want to take the conversation today. So maybe away from some of the what I'll call business stuff to more of the, how are you going to achieve life balance as we look at work, as we look at family, community, like all these things. And I'll present some things here in my presentation that will hopefully get you thinking. And what I can do afterwards, if you are interested and you want to copy this, I'll just send you the PDF of my slides. And the other thing I will offer, because you see as I get into this a little bit further, there's a framework that I use when I coach people. And the coaching is not to get to life balance, although when I walk you through what I refer to as the 3 Qs, it's IQ, EQ, and PQ, which I will explain when we get there. And I'll share the PDF, I'll put it on the screen, and if you want it, just email me and I'll send it to you, because it may help you kind of take another perspective on what we're talking about today and apply it to yourself. It might be one of these you have to search and kind of work through it a few iterations to get to the point where I think I know what balance means to me. Okay, so there's the backdrop. And Craig, unless you got anything else to say, or if anyone else has anything to jump in here, I'll just get rolling. Okay, we will roll. So let's hit share, and here we are. Okay, so I'm assuming you can see this. My little control panel says you can't, so unless someone says something or indicates otherwise, I'll continue on. Okay, so here we are. Is there such a thing? Thank you, sir. Work-life balance. Is there such a thing? Well, I don't know. And I'm kind of prepared to throw that out there as a starting point, because if you ask me, Ralph, how balanced is your life? Well, I have my moments. Some days better than other days. But if I look at it, generally speaking, I would say I'm pretty content with my life, and would define it differently than say, is it balanced to my life has meaning and purpose in what I do and when I do it and who I do it for in terms of clients or family and friends. I try to work from a point where I'm always coming from my core. And now I'm going to take these little side trips into, I'll make reference to some of these we talk about the leadership weekend and things that I do with my clients when I coach or when I come into companies and I do programs and so forth. But one of the things that I would like you to think about in this context of life balance is your brand, right? Because I think there's a correlation here between finding your sweet spot and having life reasonably balanced most of the time. And then also being that person who is known for her or his abilities, talents, skills, and what they bring to the table. And so I use the term brand. We talk about that in the leadership weekend as well. Now, it's probably not a term that you guys, maybe some of you never use, I'm sure you've heard of it, but maybe not use it in your company. But I want to refer to that around your brand as it relates to balance. Okay, so what is life balance? Well, I think it's a combination of things, and I'll walk you through what some of what I think they are. So, I think there's this whole issue, first of all, of balance as it relates to, I'll actually go back to this one here about, stress and things like that create challenges in our life. When we're out of balance, let me put it this way, we're exhausted, we're fatigued, there's low energy, there's I just don't want to get out of bed. And quite frankly, I think if we think back over the last 2 to 3 years, we're all forced into a new balance where, I don't know what it was like for where you live, but certainly down here, it was stay at home, don't go outside, wear a mask, do all these things. And it added a lot of stress, even though, we adapted to it. But I would say most of us were not balanced the last 2 to 3 years. Or some of us actually found balance because of this big paradigm shift, and then we were able to move forward. So the other thing around balance that I want to throw out there right away, and I remember attending a workshop years ago and hearing this presenter talk about balance. And I love the analogy because he said, what happens when you are balanced? So think for a moment, just in your mind here. You may want to throw in a comment later or come back to this. What happens when you achieve balance? So let's just say kind of in the big areas: personal, professional, relational, and whatever else you want to put into that, another circle perhaps. But here's, for me, what life balance means. When I actually get to the point it's balanced, I go, don't move. Nobody move. I've got balance. And I've thought about this a lot because I want to throw it out for you, because that's why I say, is there really such a thing as life balance? I don't think there is. I think we have moments when we're kind of, use a highway analogy where we're in our lane, but we're drifting over. And hopefully this isn't a one-lane road, so we're not in the ditch, right? So if you have a few lanes and you don't have it's not rush hour, you got the whole road to yourself. But you can drift into the other lane, and then you start noticing you're a little off track, and you can come back. So I think if we can stay in our lane for the most part and be there intentionally and in a way that fulfills us and our purpose and our personality and our values and our strengths, then I think that's kind of what balance looks like, because it's not I'm balanced, because then it's like, okay, don't move, nobody move, nothing changes. Well, you might be imbalanced, but what about your family, your friends, your colleagues? They're not all balanced because you are, okay? So there's some thought for the background. Okay, so what happens when you are balanced though? I have this slide here, and you see this, the image of the brain. It's one of my favorite ones, because I already touched on a couple of points here, but this is when you are working from both sides of the brain. So that left brain is what most of you are trained in. That's, quite frankly, what we need you to do. Is that left brain logical, analytical, linear? Does it make sense? Lower on emotion, higher on facts. Give me the data. Let me think about it. Let me go away. Okay, well, just think about this. If that's where you spend most of your time, then you're already not balanced, because if we just use the brain analogy, you're already lopsided because you're spending a lot of time in one domain as opposed to the other. So my suggestion to you is, let's start thinking with balance relating to two parts of who we are, just as human beings. So there's that left brain, analytical, and then as you see on the screen, that right brain, there's a guitar, and there's all kinds of different images where it's more the creative. And so I think what happens is, rather than balance, let's talk about fulfillment. So you see the bottom of the screen here. Rather than balance, what about fulfillment and contentment? Okay, so what does balance really mean to you? So here's the question for you. Your balance is different from that of others. And the point I made a moment ago, if you are, but they may not be. So, and again, when I get through this, I do want to just have some discussion and questions. So I'll already start making some mental notes, or make a note, because I'd like to come back, and I can certainly put this up again. When I'm done, though, I'll stop sharing, because I want to see you guys and connect with you. But here's what I thought with balance. So this is like a nook to shook, or nook, I don't know if I said that right, but you know what I mean, or Karens, right? This is actually the Scottish word for this. It's like a marker. It's a placeholder. And so we obviously have that with certain cultures, First Nation, Aboriginals. When you're out there in the middle of nowhere, you build this marker so that you know where you're going. And I think for us, these markers denote points of reference to bring us back to our center, or to help us move towards balance, or be mindful of balance even. That's probably not a bad starting point. So your balance is different from others. Where do you go to find your place of balance? And then the question for you, is it achievable, or what do you need to give up to get there? And I'm going to end my presentation today with something that will probably be a little thought-provoking, hopefully. We're into February, so we're still relatively, you look back, you can still see 2022 in the rearview mirror. It's getting smaller by the day. But if you think, how did you start this year? Did you make any resolutions? Did you say, this year I'm gonna stop? And so what I'm gonna wrap up the presentation with this afternoon will be, are you prepared to make some sacrifices and actually give up some things that will move you towards balance? And I can share, excuse me, my own life. There's certainly been things over the years that I gave up that got me closer to being balanced. Okay, so let's keep going. So the start with why philosophy, Simon Sinek. I'm assuming you've seen the TED Talk. It's one of the more popular ones. It's in the tens of millions of views. And if you haven't, I actually suggest that you do. And so it's Simon Sinek. If you just Google start with why, Simon Sinek, S-I-N-E-K, you'll find it. And again, this is one of the things that we cover in the Leadership Week, and it's on the first day. And I can tell you, after we watch the video and I put it out there and it's in the handout, we get people into the group, we start talking about, why do I do what I do? What's my why? Then that leads to some very interesting discussions. So here's the first thing, first takeaway, I guess, for you around balance. Why do you do what you do? And I put here in the title, I'm encouraging you to live from your why, not just discover your why, but think about how do I live from my why? Because I believe that is the path to balance. So your why can be equated to vision, also relates to values and beliefs, purpose. I call that the core. Now, again, I'll loop this back in at the end here. So why do you do what you do? For some of us, and earlier in my career, I did it to pay the mortgage and buy groceries and stuff. So I get that. We're not always in this amazing spot where everything is just balanced and it's, we're just happy all the time. It's, if you're lucky, you end up, you find those spots, and if you're lucky as you go through your life, you can actually move towards that. It's got to be intentional. I'll tell you that just from, obviously you can tell by my hair color, I'm not 35 anymore. I've done a few laps, and as I continue to do laps here, God willing, I will look at how I continue to refine, but I'm very clear, and this has helped me a lot. So from a balance point of view, this allows me to say yes and no to certain things. Okay, so next thing, as I look at Simon's little framework here, is the how. Okay, so you move from why to how. So your how relates to your passion, commitment, things that make impact. And I would say it's what differentiates you, because when you start with your why, and you move to the how, this is now where people start seeing what's important to you, which leads to the what, which is your knowledge, your approach, and your experience. Sorry, saw we cut the E off there, which then links into what I refer to as your value proposition. And value proposition is a marketing term. So some of you may be familiar with the term from either do any kind of marketing or BD for your company, or even been involved in social media or website development. You go, okay, well, or a proposal, certainly. You go to an interview, you do a proposal, it's an RFP proposal, you submit, go to the interview, and they say, well, why you guys? Why you specifically? And this is where this really comes into play. So it's what sets you apart or what defines you. So it typically would lead to our actions. Okay, so again, staying with Simon Sinek for a moment here, one of the things that Sinek has certainly influenced me about is how I do what I do, where I work, who I work with, the outcomes I seek. But I've realized, and this again relates to balance, is that it's not about how successful will I be today or this week or this month, but it's what I refer to as the long game. I used that term a few minutes ago. Now he has another one of his books, or his last book is The Infinite Game. I can't see it, but it's not. Some about the infinite game. But he talks about the infinite vision, or that's what I've taken out of this. And so I think what's helpful for us is to realize that we never really arrive, because unless you go to vacation, get on a plane, you get there, okay, you've arrived. But when it comes to life, it's iterative. And I think the key with balance, so again, here's one of the takeaways, think about this, is where you're at today, are you closer to balance? And when you think of the long game, when you think of not how you started, but what I always say when I work with people about how you finish, are you moving towards that finish, whatever you define that? None of us know how long we're going to live, but we have a sense of the phases of life. So I heard someone recently refer to it, first quarter, second quarter, or thirds, or however you want to play with that. But I think it's important from a balance point of view to get really clear of where we spend our time, because that's what leads to balance. So let me talk a little bit here about some of the things that I believe lead to the balance. And there's that yin yang symbol. You've seen that before. It's a great one. I love that, because two opposites, but when you combine them, they create a whole, but they're very different. And I think that's what we need to have in the way of self-awareness. So for me, what I've listed here, and you can have your own list. I mean, you Google this, you come up with the 10, the 12, the 5, the 3. I mean, everyone's got their opinion, but this is what I've landed on. Okay, physical. I think that, and I know this from experience, for many years, I've worked with a trainer, and I've tried to really look after myself. That makes a huge difference. It allows me to be more balanced, because I'm taking the energy and channeling, plus also the endorphins and all the benefit that comes from physical activity. That leads to a more balanced, calmer, healthier life. So obviously, top of the list. But then that's not all we do. We just go to the gym all day or run around the block. We need to be developing our minds, right? So there's the intellectual, what I call the environmental, is where we live, what we do. The vocation, so it's what you do in the morning when you get up. Relational, which is in social terms, emotional, and spiritual health. Now, I don't mean religion there, but I think this is an important one, because I find more and more people, it comes up in my coaching, that they realize that it isn't just the top things, which are sort of the usual suspects, but rather that we have to also look inward and look for what I'll call more of a holistic, balanced, and for me, a real balance, because I think those are big drivers. Okay, the other thing that I'd like to throw out there for you, and again, bearing in mind, you heard my introduction, I do a lot of work with the YEA cohort. Well, they're basically 25 to 35. Because once you're over 35, you become a toy. Too old for YEA is the, you may not have heard that acronym before, but that's we have some toys attending Leadership 2.0, because if the criterion is if you come to the 1.0, then we can't say no to you in 2.0. So we have 39-year-olds, 42-year-olds, whatever. They say, I want to come back. And as they come back, what I've noticed, if they've taken one of my sessions back, let's say in 2012 or 2014 or whatever, and they've been gone for a while, they've changed. Now, obviously, they're not kids anymore, firmly into adulthood, but we could even say within adulthood, there are phases there. So again, I'm really thick slicing this here, but I think for you, again, given the topic, because this was the topic of choice, it topped the list, I'd encourage you to look at life balance in terms of the phases of your life, because they do change. And things when you're young, when you get older, either just aren't that important more, or you have more perspective and other things become more important. Okay, so the piece that for me also is very important here around this whole balance issue is finding meaning and finding purpose. So finding meaning and purpose is really important because it allows us to get to that sweet spot, to our core. And here you may have come across this, or you may not have, but it's a Japanese term, ikigai. And if you Google it, you can see Ikigai Masters talk to you about what this is and why it's important. I put it in here because when I started to prepare this presentation, I thought, let's look beyond business. Let's kind of see what are some of the factors. And you can see here very quickly in this Venn diagram that there's all kinds of components here. And again, I'm not going to do a deep dive, but I'm putting this out there today for you to think, to reflect. So Ikigai, one of the things that if you look at this a little bit more, you'll hear them talk about reason for being and purpose. So I put those two terms here below the title. And when you look at Ikigai, which is in that center, that's when you are living or you've achieved or close to that reason for being and your purpose, you'll see that it is not one-dimensional. There's all kinds of things that are at play here. And the key ones, there's Ikigai in the middle, and then you go to the next circle, you have passion, mission, vocation, and profession. And those are sort of the usual suspects. And then the what I'm going to talk about here a little bit in a few minutes is what you're good at as it relates to what I covered the weekend. And again, we'll hopefully give you some other ideas. Now, I think the other thing that is very important, and it's very relevant to today's topic, and some of you, because I know we're way off sort of on a different tangent here today, because we're into the more what I'll call touchy-feely mindfulness and what other areas, but I think again it's important, particularly as we come out of I know we're out of COVID, but we still have this COVID hangover, as I call it. So we ain't back to normal yet. It's not business as usual. So when you look at this, and it's one of the other slides I had, what you'll find here is a really good wheel. When I coach, and I used to have one of my colleagues who did a lot of coaching, when we started off working with people, we'd actually give them this and go, okay, here's a pen, or do it on virtually, however you want to do it on your tablet or a piece of paper and a pen or pencil, but score it. And I would encourage you to do this. Right, so you take a screenshot now, or if you want the PDF, or you just go look up one of these life assessment wheels, you'll find this. And so here's another one of my recommendations. Do this after today if this topic resonates for you. Because as soon as you complete this, and I recall I did mine years ago, when I actually had to think about and quantify, okay, where am I at in each of these categories? It became very evident very quickly, graphically, where I was doing, from my perspective at least, pretty darn good, and the part that was missing. And what was funny, well, actually wasn't funny, what was interesting, insightful, was what I found where I scored it low, if I was honest with myself. Those were often things I talked about doing and I wanted to be better at, but they actually rated low. And so procrastination or unrealistic goals or whatever. So this is, again, the takeaway from today, I would encourage you, because, we don't have 500 people signing up today, it's a smaller group, but I got to believe that life balance is important to you. So hopefully this resonates for you, and this would be something that you consider doing. Okay, so where I'm going now is to one of the tools that I use on the weekend. And so I've kind of set it up. Now I want to talk to you about, and I mentioned this a few minutes ago, the leadership brand. And we'll go through this in a few more slides and then we'll open up, we'll talk. And I can always come back again to the slide if you want me to. So here's my little creation, and where this came from. I did a lot of coaching with the British Columbia couple offices, well, actually several other offices with Stantec. So I don't know if they're up in Alaska, but probably heard of the company name. Some of you may have worked there. A lot of people work at these large companies like a Stantec or a WSP or whoever. But one of the things I learned there when I was doing what we called the Emerging Leaders Program, and these were young professionals on their way up, very bright people, but they were on the path to move into leadership. One of the things that we talked about was sort of work-life balance at the time, because they were working hard. They were burning the midnight oil off them. But I got them to think about the balance. And what we talked was the IQ. Well, everybody, okay, IQ, I get it, right? We know IQ is important. IQ helps you get your degree. It helps you pass exams. It helps you go into a situation, do problem solving and analysis. Check that box. Well, EQ, emotional intelligence or emotional quotient, becoming much more prevalent now in terms of awareness and understanding and being valued, right? And this is the important thing, because it used to be, oh, all that EQ, that's that soft, fluffy stuff. That doesn't matter. Doesn't relate to the work we do, because we design stuff. We do formulas. We do calculations. You don't need feelings for that. No, you don't, but you sure need feelings in terms of the emotional ability to communicate this and get other people to understand and to communicate and to buy in, kind of important. So you can be really smart and have facts and figures, but if it doesn't connect, they don't relate, you're on your own. But here's what I discovered. So that's why this little framework, why I'm sharing it with you. The magic really was in the PQ, and this stands for passion quotient. So intelligence, emotion, passion. And what I found, and that's why I put it in today's presentation for you to share with you and for you to think about, and we can talk about this. I believe, and I've seen this in my life, but particularly in countless people that I've coached, when they look at this and they actually start working at it, they start realizing, I'm going to be more balanced, more fulfilled, happier, find my purpose, find my sweet spot, work from my strengths, leverage my personality and my talents when I'm working from the center. Okay, so what's involved in this? Well, here's the three pieces. So IQ, if you're really smart, thank mom and dad. Now, the degrees and the ongoing education and everything else you got, that's on you, good on you. But at least you started with the raw material. But then we bring in the EQ. And some of us have more of this than others, right? So I refer to this as the innate ability. So you could be there's the nature. Some people just get it more. They just have a better sensibility and awareness of this. But we can also be nurtured, right? So we can be raised in an environment or work for a boss or have colleagues that go, side of the smack in the side of the head, like, what you just said? Did you see how people responded? No. Well, sometimes we need someone to point it out and go, oh, well, I didn't think it was a big deal. Well, not to you, but to everybody else it is, right? So again, this is part of the balance, because you will not be balanced and work from a balanced point of view if nobody wants to be around you. You may have aspirations and goals, but if you don't have people that want to work with you and be with you, it's kind of it, you're it, baby, right? So anyway, the good news is this can be taught and developed. And again, if you're into personal development, you may have heard of Daniel Goleman. There's many others that talk about emotional intelligence, but he's kind of like the grandfather of this, that did the research, wrote the books, and laid a lot of the foundation for us. Okay, and then the third area, deep-seated interest, innate talents, convictions. And this, as you see here, it can be influenced by the environment that you're in and you grow up in, but it's really who you are. What are you passionate about? And you can see I haven't limited this to business, because there's things that come into life balance that I believe are outside of work and that need to be factored into how we organize ourselves and our time and where we allocate our resources. Okay. So this then naturally leads into, if we go back here to the EQ piece, one of the things, again, that we cover in the leadership weekend is making decisions and operating as a leader, and it also leads to balance, right? Underlying theme here today, but leads to balance is when we're working from a 3-point perspective. So head, heart, and gut. What we now know, we really started, there was research that has been done for decades now, but where we really started being able to pull this apart and realize that we're much more complicated than we've really, well, I wouldn't say some people realize they're complicated, but we actually can define it better now, let me put it that way. This started happening a couple of decades ago. And what we know is that, and I'll just give you the assessment. You can look this up. It's common knowledge. Excuse me. Still suffering the effects of sinus infection and a cold here. The head has got about 100 billion neurons. The heart 40,000, and the gut 100 million. Sorry, it's 100 million. So if you think of the neurons, how we process, how we analyze and evaluate, we actually have the three brains. But why is this important with balance, life balance? Well, here's why. I've coached a lot of people over the years, and when I ask them, so what do you think about this, right? If they're working towards a goal, and it could be a goal of finding more balance in their life, professional, personal, family, whatever, they tell me what they think. So I need to more of this, less of that. Typically they quantify. Then I'll say, well, how do you feel about this, your goal, your aspiration, or how do you feel about where you're at now as it relates to balance? And then often they struggle a bit more, particularly in the technical realm, because we're taught to use that left brain, as I shared earlier with you. So this is sometimes the part where we need to come back to a bit. And then I'll say, well, at a gut level, where you're at, what's your sense? And excuse me, what happens inevitably, if not initially, but over time, when we start exploring this, and when they start thinking about their head, their heart, and their gut as it relates to purpose and meaning, I'll go back to start with why, go back to the IQ, the EQ, and the PQ, go back to the Ikigai, what gives you purpose, what grounds you. We start realizing there's some stuff that we've tended to ignore. That's what I've discovered over the years. So hopefully for you today, what I'm putting out here is getting you to think maybe about some of these, what I refer to as nudges. Because generally speaking, if I start working with people and we start having candid conversations about this, they actually start going, I do have this gut sense about this. I've had this so intuitive sense I should be this, or my husband, wife, partner, friend, whoever keeps saying to me, you're doing this, but you don't seem to be happy, and you keep talking about this. I think that would fulfill you. So the head, heart, gut is really important. So as we come to a bit of a wrap up here shortly, and then I'll open it up for input. Here's what I think are some of the things that I want to leave you with. So I've created a bit of a checklist here. First, I think balance comes by saying no more than saying yes. Now think about that. If you're a people pleaser, or if you're in a role where you're sort of the meat in the sandwich, you get pressure from all sides. I realize sometimes we just can't say no. It's tough. But one of the takeaways for you here today is I'm going to encourage you to think about saying no. And I'll wrap up here with an S-curve model in a moment. Touched on the head, heart, gut. So I'm calling that so there's the say piece, then there's the go inside. Do the test. At the 3 points, what are you hearing? The B relates to purpose. Are you clear on your purpose? So whether it's your why, whether it's some of the things that I've shared with you here, the wheels, the Ikigai. The other thing that I believe is really important as relates to balance is finding joy. You will not be balanced if you're not happy. You will not be balanced if you're not joyful. And then that leads often, obviously, to fulfillment. And again, you heard me talk before about going inside. I think that the real balance is on the inside when all pieces are arranged or ordered in a way that makes sense, that gives you fulfillment, right? So that's, you got to work it. You have to look for that. Doesn't just show up. This stuff is actually pretty difficult if you want to do it. And then it's called, and I refer to the live in the present versus the future, right? And as opposed to the past. I used to do volunteer work with recovering alcoholics and drug addicts years ago. And one of the things I found with them was when we would have our group coaching sessions, they would talk about where they were, what they were trying to avoid and get away from. And I use the analogy that I share in all kinds of settings, because it's not limited to that, is focus on where you want to be. If you've ever taken a skid control course, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And you guys, you're up north, it's cold, ice, snow. We deal primarily with rain here, but when it does get cold, just stupid stuff happens because people don't know how to drive, or we don't drive in it enough that we get, reasonably good at it. But I remember years ago, I worked for Union Carbide early in my career. Because we're on the road a lot, we went to a skid control course. And I remember all the details. One thing I remember clearly is when you're in a skid, when the car's out of control, which is a good metaphor for life, don't watch your hood while going around and then you see a tree and you see a ditch and you see a rock and you see a cliff. Focus on where you want to go. And that's basic same thing here. Where are you today? What are you doing now? And yes, where do you want to go? So you need to focus on that, but you can't live in tomorrow because you don't get to tomorrow till today's over, and then you're in today again, right? And then there's tomorrow. And then focus more on and this is kind of a Ralphism here, more on internal fulfillment than the stuff, because you chase the stuff will never do it, because you probably already know this, but I work with a lot of very successful people, and a lot of them are very wealthy, and the ones that have more money aren't, from a relative term, that much happier because they have tens of millions or hundreds of millions. They're not 100 times happier. If anything, they often have less joy and fulfillment. Okay, so here's coming to the end, and then again, questions, comments. So here's one of the things that I'm going to suggest you think about. Pardon me. We're still early in the year, and when I coach people, when I do workshops, I'm always talking about what should you drop, what do you keep, and what do you add. So one of the things I want to leave you with is this little quote here, which is "What got you here won't get you there," is a nod to Marshall Goldsmith. He's basically an executive coach. He works with top executive leaders around the world. And he wrote a book a number of years ago by that title, "What got you here won't get you there." And so as it relates to balance, what got you to where you are today will not get you to the balance you're seeking to achieve. So my question and suggestion to you is, before I choke up completely here, what are you prepared to drop? And this requires reflection and evaluation. What are the things that you should keep because you know they're good? They make you better, they make you good, and they fulfill you, and they bring joy and benefit to others. And then what do you need to add? Where do you need to go to get better at what you're doing? Okay, so where I'm going to end now is, and I'll stop sharing here because I want to, have interact with you guys. Is from this, what's the takeaway for you today? If you have one big takeaway, or if you have one idea, what is that? So what is the implication? And then now what do you do? Okay, and so there's me, but let's stop this first of all. And hopefully I've given you something to think about, and let's just open it up. And I'm gonna take a throat lozenge here so I don't seize up. And what do you think? Comments, questions, thoughts, anything resonate for you? Want me to go back to anything? Over to you guys.
Well, you always have the dynamic of a large group and nobody wants to talk. So I'll start, even though I'm a toy. I guess I first would say this process never ends. Though I'm well into my toy age, everything that you mentioned in this whole process, I'm still working on at the age of 49. So don't think that you're going to figure this out later on in life.
Yeah. You get to the top of a mountain and you see there's another mountain. So you just, yeah.
Or you more likely blindly going through the forest, not realizing that the mountain was there to begin with.
Yeah, great point, Greg. And age and experience gives us great perspective. So yeah, thank you. Okay,
Curtis, I see you unmuted there. Did you have a question? That wheel of life diagram that you sent was really powerful. How often do you recommend it it get picked back up in a certain time frame and reevaluated? Like, okay, what changed over this time? Or
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I think that wheel is really important, and I can put it back on and speak to it as well. So let me just do this. And go back here.
and then I guess once you find yourself significantly deficient in a particular area, are there resources to be able to find out how to raise your score in those particular areas?
Yeah. So let me give you a quick context. You know, when we start working with people, and particularly coaches, like life coaches use this. I'm not a quote life coach. I do leadership coaching and development, so that's my sweet spot. However, obviously, you're not going to be a good leader if you don't look at your life and kind of get some order there. So I will get into these areas and discuss this with people that I'm working with. So I would say, so initially, this is a great thing to use as a starting point. So if you've never done this, this might be something you want to consider doing today. And if not today, but like in the near future. And then whether you print out a hard copy, whether you go online, the thing whenever I work with people, we go through this, I get them to rank and score, and then I get them to put a date on it, because what's important with this is not to do it and throw it out. Actually, where these things become really valuable is over a period of time, when you go back and you look at, oh, that was in March of 2023. I'm reviewing it now, maybe January of 2024. So let's see kind of the last 9 months, what's changed, if anything. I'm gonna go do it again, or use the same, keep the same wheel, but use a different color or a different instrument to mark it and say, this is where I think I'm at. So did it decrease? Did it remain the same? Did I increase? And then over a period of time, what will become evident is that if there's stuff that it's just not, you don't get above a 5, like it's just not moving, then you have to start asking yourself, is it realistic? And is this really important? Like it's on there, but you know, am I good enough at where I'm at, right? Because on some stuff, you know, good enough is good enough. Because what I often say when I coach people, and again, it comes back to balance, is don't try to major in the minors, meaning you really put a lot of time into getting good at something, but you can't get out of the minor leagues, all that time, energy, money you put into it, you're still where you are. You're taking that and put it into something where you have natural strengths, ability, and passion. That's gonna pay way more dividends. So this could be an indicator, it could be a checkpoint, and then the last thing, this could be something you give to someone who knows you well, probably somebody that you live with, and say, you do this, and where would you rank me on this? And then now you have a comparative. Did that help, or is that?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Any thoughts or questions?
You guys can also add questions into the chat too, if that's easier.
Well, let me throw something out here, because this, as I mentioned in my opening comment, typically I'm talking about other things, leadership. Sorry, guys, just it's starting to act up here again. But this is not a typical topic, but I would say it's an important one. Is there something else relating to whether it's Ashrae or you just personally and professionally that you want to bring into the discussion that maybe this got you thinking about? Okay. Well, and look, I mean, and I'm fine with this. No one has to say something if you don't want to, because if I've given you some ideas, and if you have, here's kind of what I was looking at. If I've given you one idea from something I've said that's made you think, maybe reflect a bit, look at your situation in light of life balance, because again, this was the topic that we chose this because there was a survey that went out, and this kind of seemed to make it to the top of the pile. That's why we presented. So I'm assuming those of you that came were interested in this. So if at minimum you get an idea, you have the perspective on something that will help you to move towards balance, then I'm fine, and I'm quite content with that as long as you are.
Oh, it is of high demand, again, of all age groups, and something that we in this seminar process, I think every presenter has talked about it and how easy it is to get out of balance, especially in your early years. Like you said, when you're trying to please the boss and they're asking you to do more and more work, and you open up that faucet and start putting in those 50, 60 hours, and then burn out and leave because you don't like the industry, but it was balance and saying no. That was a big thing. Can you, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I think to add to the point you've just made, with COVID, what I certainly found was people, a lot of us were under additional pressure because we still had to do what we did before, but we had to do it in what I'll refer to as adverse or certainly challenging conditions. It was maybe sitting in your bedroom or your kitchen or wherever on a computer, and life goes on around you. And still having to work and try to manage and balance. And then hopefully not, but unfortunately, most of us either knew somebody who got sick or worse. And so that was our reality. But what came out of that, and where I'm going with this point, is we have this phenomenon that you've all heard about, quiet quitting. Now we have quiet firing. We have all this, I was finding it amusing. All these things always give rise to new terms and conditions or situations. But one thing that I do believe, as it relates to our topic today, is that the last 3 years really brought home for people more than it ever had before. I need to get balance in my life, because maybe I survived through COVID and it wasn't balanced. But boy, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go to that environment again. But more importantly, here's what I've seen a lot of my coaching over the years is people didn't have balance before we got into COVID. But we kept working back to your 40 hours, or sorry, your 80 whatever hours a week or whatever you need to do. We did it because everybody else was doing it. And now we went, I don't have to keep doing it, I have options. So I think this topic, maybe what triggered this was people are realizing that they actually do have options, they do have some control and influence, and that maybe moving forward, what they're going to do is be more intentional about how they seek that balance.
On the S curves, again, if somebody's got a better question, otherwise I'm going to keep talking and asking questions, but by all means, folks.
Thank you.
On the S curves, can you expand on how you evaluate what to drop?
Absolutely. Let me go back.
Just to add, we have 100 things we'd love to add to our life, but the drop part is the is the
okay. So let me go back. Where are we here? Okay. So when I work with people, the drop thing, I always say there's a correlation between finding your sweet spot, right, where there's that fulfillment. So let's say you're doing something that requires, it's more that left brain, that IQ focus. And you do it because you're smart, right? And you can. But there's something over here, let's call it, emotional, more relational. It could be another role. It could be something in an opportunity, any number of things. But you say, gee, I'd like to move to that direction, but you don't have the time because you're so committed to doing the IQ piece, right? The technical, the left brain. What has to happen, I believe, is first self-awareness that there's a shift that's required. The self-awareness that maybe this isn't as fulfilling as I thought it was, or that it would be. And I say that from the perspective of before I started my business, I was a recruiter, so I did the headhunting thing. And I'd have people come in often about 10 years into their career. So they're typically in their early to mid 30s, sometimes late 30s. And they had gone and become a whatever. But did they, hang on, so resource assessments, gone, okay. All right, I'll come back to that in a sec. It disappeared, so let me come back at the end here. Because yes, I can recommend assessments. But they would find that what they were good at, because they were smart, they could pass the test, they could write the exams, they could get hired, But about 5 to 10 years in, and this is often related to personality, strengths assessments, talent assessments. I'll talk more about that in a moment here. They went, I'm not happy anymore. And so that's when they started to do some dropping. So what I'm saying to your point here is that be aware of what's fulfilling you. And if it isn't what you started off as and the path you were on, it's okay to move, because life goes by a whole lot faster than you realize and than you think it will. And when you look back, what will often happen, I should have made that change 10 years ago, or that opportunity to move over more to whether it's the EQ piece, or I've always felt really strongly about this, and it could be a cause. For some people, what that ends up meaning is they give up the day job, or they take components of what's in the day job, but they go over here and do it. It could be for a not-for-profit, or they might do that off the side of the desk in the evenings or on weekends or on vacation. But I think the dropping comes to, first of all, going inside and going, what am I just not enjoying anymore? I might be good at it, and that's the problem. You're good at it, but you don't like it. What can I move towards? And then that requires some of the things I've talked about, self-awareness. And then that's where sometimes a coach or a mentor or a colleague can be of great value to help you kind of sift through this stuff. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
All right. So who asked the question? There was it Rebecca, I think. Yeah. So Rebecca, can you just either post it again or just ask me the question or just repost it now? Something about assessments, I think. Well, let me see if I can find it here. Do you have any resources or assessments to help find passions and connect to those in your career? Absolutely. So two tools that I use are it's a psychometric profiling tool. There's lots of them out there. You're probably familiar with DISC. This goes beyond DISC. The tool is called People Profile System. It's a company out of Alberta here in Canada, and I used to be a distributor for their products, and so I know it extensively. It's a highly advanced psychometric tool, which basically provides an in-depth report of your traits, so who you are outside of work, and then also how that fits into work. And again, this is one of the big takeaways from the leadership weekend, because we do this in 1.0, and people, you often, if you've been at the weekend or someone that has, you'll hear them talk about their dots. This is what I'm referring to. And for some of them, they've come to that leadership weekend, what I call a pretzel, because who they are in terms of their traits and who they should be, trying to be at work, is who they're not. And so they actually literally shift from a traits point of view, their behaviors, to try to be someone who they're not. You're not balanced. You're not happy. You're not even probably good at your work if you have to stay in that role for a long time. So that's one of the tools. And then there's Hogan, and there's DISC, and there's others, colors, and what have you. But I'd say invest in a better quality one, because this one that I use is 5th generation. It's highly accurate and it provides great insight. Then the second piece, which is what we cover in the leadership weekend, but on weekend 2, is the Gallup Clifton Strengths, or it used to be known as Strengths Finder. Now it's Clifton Strengths. That's the other piece. There's 34 strengths inventory. And then when you get the report, they give you your top 5, and then the second 5, so your top 10. And then they show you within 4 domains of executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking, where you naturally land. That, my friends, is the biggest clue for you to go where the money is, if I can put it. I don't mean the cash money, but the money as in fulfillment. When you lead and find a job or a vocation or a calling or a passion where you're leading and working from your strengths, you start getting more balance, because now you're not going to work anymore in the traditional sense. You're working from your strengths, and then if you can take my 3Q model and find out where your purpose is, now the wheels are starting to turn here. Back to the drop, then you start knowing what is easy to drop, because you're going, it just doesn't hold the attraction to me. The appeal is gone. I can let it go, and I'm not going to go bring it back in. Put it in the blue box and leave it on the curb, and it's gone. You're welcome.
Can you repeat that Gallup tool. What was the name of that again?
It's Clifton Strengths Finder. So Don, it's this Clifton Strengths Assessment. And Don Clifton was the psychologist who developed this. It's basically positive psychology. So rather than looking at a person's weaknesses and saying you need to get better at this, the research now supports this. We're better off to put our energy and time into areas that we have strengths and talents in, as opposed to go from being not that good at to mediocrity, right? So that's the whole principle behind what Gallup does. It's a very valid point. There's lots of research that would support that. But I've certainly seen that in my own life when I play from my strengths, and I do. And when I coach people that play from their strengths, then back to the balance, the topic today, then we start getting balance. And it's not 50-50, life. It's just, I live more and more balanced way because I'm more fulfilled.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Anyone else? I guess, Ralph, are there any good books / audio books that folks should be? There's always ones on the market out there. Some of the old ones are the best. Some of the brand new ones are really great. What are the ones you would recommend?
Well, I would start with the Strengths Finder, right? You can go online, do that assessment. It's if you go to Gallup, you'll see they have 3 options. There's the one with your top 5. I think there's 3 options. I recommend you get the full report. I think it's something like $80 or $90. It's not a lot of money, and what it gives you is just great insight. So that's one for sure. They also have a book. I think it's still out there. I've seen it on somebody's desk recently. What color is your parachute? This guy, he updated it every year. I mean, this is now going back a few years. He may no longer be doing this, he wouldn't be alive anymore, but there's probably some version of what color is your parachute. I would suggest that some personality assessment is done. I think that's just important, and get a high quality tool because it comes so far. They're very accurate. That provides insight. I don't particularly recommend Myers-Briggs for in-depth work. It's great for team building and self-awareness, but what we're talking about here for purpose, there's better tools. I would recommend, I already talked about it, Simon Sinek, Start With Why. That's a great book to read, or literally watch, or at minimum watch the video on TED, one of the TED Talks, and then buy the book Finding Your Why, right? Because there's a correlation between when you find your why and life balance, because you start to work about things that are important to you. That's where the balance comes. Oh gosh, there's nothing else is jumping out top of. Yeah, okay. Here's one book I thought of. Necessary Endings, because it's sort of in a bit of an angle to this, but Necessary Endings, and his name is, I'm drawing a blank on it, but if you look it up, he's a psychologist, Dr. Henry Cloud. There you go. Look up Clouds. Dr. Henry Cloud, Necessary Endings. I read that book a couple of years ago, and it was really helpful because back to that dropkeep ad, we, generally speaking, spend too much adding stuff. We just keep putting it in, put another brick in the knapsack. When the knapsack's full, we get a little red wagon, then we put bricks in there. And then when that wagon's full, we get a little hitch and we get another wagon. And before you know it, metaphorically, we're dragging all this stuff along behind us. We're going, oh, I'm overwhelmed. Well, look behind you. You're schlepping all this stuff. You got to get rid of some of it. And Cloud does a great job because, again, he's a psychologist and he's got a clinical practice, but he also does work with corporations. It's a great book to really make you think about what do you need to end. And in some cases, it gets into relationships because sometimes life balance is not achieved because we have the equivalent of a leech, an energy leech or a relational leech attached to us that we keep feeding. And so I know I'm getting into a different area here now, but this life balance topic is not just, do these 5 things, here's a bit of pixie dust and you're there. So there's a couple of recommendations, Craig, that get you guys on the right path. And the other thing, if you want to get connected with me, go on LinkedIn and you'll see I put out videos, usually about 3 a week, and there's other stuff that some of them deal with this stuff, some of them don't, obviously. But I may do a video that you find useful and interesting. So I might be a resource for you.
I'm glad you mentioned LinkedIn because I was going to mention at the end, you do post some amazing stuff on there. And it's a great resource.
Thank you.
If you have LinkedIn, definitely follow Ralph.
So there, I've given you a bunch of ideas. I know some people have had to go. We had an hour, so I'm sure some people booked an hour and have appointments. But again, I'm still, Craig, you've got, I think you said a couple of minutes before you have to wrap up. So sort of last call here. Are there any other questions or things you want to get? I'd love to hear from you. I mean, I was hoping some people might share how they've achieved life balance if they have, or there's some things they've done. So if anybody wants to jump in here in the chat or share something before we wrap up. Okay.
Ralph, before we sign off, can you put up the last image of the presentation that's got your email address one last time so people can write that down?
You bet. Yeah. And if you'd, okay, come on. If people, if any of you want to have this, what I can do is I can send, why don't I just do this? Why don't I send the PDF to you, Craig, and then you've got it. And if people want it, they email you, excuse me. You see here on the, you do a screenshot or just write it down. You've got my email address, my website. You want to email me and ask for something specific. I have that one worksheet. Yeah, remember the 3 Qs, the IQ, the EQ, the PQ. You want me to send you the PDF on that so you can actually go in a little bit deeper and dig. Glad to send you that. And then there's the LinkedIn address to follow me.
Excellent. And we'll post that along with the recording of this video on the Ashrae Alaska YEA's website there. So it'll be there with the
video. Okay, super.
Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you again, sir. Really appreciate the knowledge transfer, and again, cannot say how fantastic your leadership weekend things are. And again, if anybody is of that age, of that under 35, I believe is YEA.
Yeah.
Find an officer in the Alaska chapter and make sure that you get in there for that YEA scholarship to go see Ralph in person and get a full weekend of this.
Yeah, and to your point, Craig, it's I'm obviously always honored when people show up, because we've got quite a following. Like, this thing has its own reputation, and it does sell out every time, except obviously through COVID we diverted, and then we had to rebuild a bit for 1 or 2 sessions. But we're back on full on strong. So if it's something you're interested in, get the calendars for yourself or for one of your team members or chapter members. And then the other thing, though, is it's a great time to just meet other Ashrae members. I mean, what I always encourage is to network, because particularly if someone's in a YEA, they're under 35, you still got a lot of runway ahead of you from a career point of view, assuming you stay, keep doing what you're doing. One of the keys for success in life and business is relationships. And so there's a lot of connections that are forged there that I've had the benefit now, because we've been doing this over a decade, seeing these people evolve. When I was looking just recently at stuff from the winter conference, there were a couple of people I mentored. They did a presentation yesterday. I was going to do it, but then we were under the assumption we could still do it virtually. But I was going to fly to to Atlanta just for an hour and a half. So I just thought costs and everything involved. So they did it. But what you'll see is, particularly within YEA and then within Ashrae, you're going to start seeing and are seeing people that have gone through these leadership weekends move up within the organization, move up within their company, but move up within the industry. So it's a great place for development of future leaders and getting some of the skills that maybe you don't get at work. So there's my plug for the weekend.
Excellent.
That's all I got to say, guys. It's been a slice. Thanks for coming. Hope you got some good ideas from it.